Good morning and welcome to another edition of Mustang Monday, otherwise known as Will This Car Actually Make It Out of the Garage in 2019? Bunch of little stuff done this week. Oil pressure gauge came in, so right out of the gate I got that installed. Hopefully as soon as I start the engine up I'm going to need to make sure that it's getting oil pressure. That was the reason the motor was originally given to me, was because it wasn't making oil pressure. I'm hoping that I resolved that problem when I took it apart. Guess we'll find out. A lot of discussion about whether or not you should or shouldn't use Teflon tape on sending units like this. I chose to. The last time I tried it and didn't work out, I got a little bit of a leak. I may not. Some people say it interferes with the ground. Some people say it doesn't because the tape gets cut by the threads anyways. Who knows for sure? I guess I'll find out. If I have a problem with it, I'll go through and take it off. I ended up having to use a combination of an extension and a couple of fittings and an angle to get it to clear the fuel pump and the oil pump, but managed to get it installed. And ran the wire, loomed it up, and cut it and attached it to the sensor. Not ready to start the car yet, so not going to need it, but hopefully real soon. A replacement carburetor came in. The other one leaked and the fuel floats stick. So I went ahead and ordered a new one. The other one wasn't mine anyways. It's going to need rebuilt. Pretty standard, 600 CFM, Holley, vacuum secondaries. Got it installed, torqued the bolts down, pretty much ready to get hooked up. Fuel line, starter cable linkage, etc. 22-gallon fuel tank came in and to the sending unit, so I got that installed and then put it back in its box and set it on top of the car. I'm not quite ready to get to the back of the car yet, so it's going to have to sit there for a couple of days. We've got a little bit more door and window weather stripping work. I got the rest of the parts for the windows in, got those together and temporarily installed. They're going to need some adjusting, but for right now they're in the doors. I can't drop them and break them, I hope. If anybody can figure out a way to do it, I can. Pulled the passenger side vent window out of the box, took it apart, cleaned all of the chrome off, gave it a good scuff and sand, primer, paint. It's pitted enough that I'm not going to try and leave it alone. I will replace them down the road, but for right now, save a couple bucks and, well, we'll get me through the tour, hopefully. Most of these windows were in reasonable enough shape. They didn't require a lot of real aggressive grinding, just enough sanding to give the paint a little bit of adherence capability, and then a quick coat of rattle can primer and rattle can black. And once I had the stuff mostly cleaned up and painted, went through and replaced all of the weather stripping, put the thing back together again, and installed it in the door. Down the road, it's going to need a lot of adjustment. Passenger side actually went in a lot easier than the driver's side did. I mean, who'd have thunk it? The second one you do is easier than the first one because you learn from your mistakes, hopefully. With the vent window in, I installed the door window, main roll-up and window, function tested it. Everything works good. Like I said, going to need some adjustment down the road, but good start. And the same thing with the rear quarter window. Got it cleaned up, painted, installed the weather stripping, fastened everything down, replaced the missing guide roller, and stuck it in the car. And since I was working on the windows, I went ahead and got working on the roof rail weather stripping. That's a mouthful to say. One of these I was able to clean up fairly easy with the acetone. The other one I needed to do a little bit of grinding on, but long story short, got them cleaned up, got them installed, and used some Gorilla tape on the top side to stick them to the thing, and then went through and fastened all of the screws in place. Lined it pretty well. Surprise, actually went in much easier than I expected them to. And dug the weather stripping out of the attic and did a little test fitting on the doors, and it looks like they're going to seal. Got some of the battery cables and alternator cables run and wired up this week. Once again, hoping I can get the wiring finished and give the car a test start by using a key. That would be a spectacular start to the week. Figured a good place to start would be the solenoid, so I stuck that in its factory location. It's ugly. I'll move it down the road, but for now, it's going to work. The solenoid was installed. I ran a section of cable to a battery and two sections of wire, actually two 6-gauge sections of wire to the 140 amp alternator. Want an extra little bit of assurance on being able to carry that much current. Once I had the alternator and the battery wires installed, I took a section of 2-gauge cable from a previous project, trimmed it to length, cut it with a bandsaw, and hammered a fitting on the end of it and then shrink wrapped. And while I had the camera turned around facing the driveway, something kind of interesting happened. I'll leave it to play at the end of this short clip. Just watch the top of the screen. It certainly woke me up, that's for sure. Got the wiring for the relay panel terminated and connected, set up. Hopefully, again, ready to get started, and so I can start hooking the forward lights and parts of the car up. Hopefully this coming up week. We'll see. Laid the wires out where I wanted them to be in the car eventually. Cut them to length, went through, spliced them all, put the connectors in there. And then wired, I started on one side, kind of a retrospective thing on my fuse panel is I should have been a little bit more diligent about not making sure the wires looked pretty, but making sure that the wires lined up a little easier. It's still possible to make sure that the appropriate connections are where they need to be, but it would have been a little easier if I'd have been a little more careful when I got started. But once I had everything wired up, I went through and put the fancy little things for the lights and horns and stuff like that on the cover of the fuse panel. Turned it over, lengthened the ground wires, and ran them to a distribution block with a common bar that came with the distribution system, and then ran that to a heavy gauge ground wire that'll eventually go to the frame of the car. Or someplace, I don't know, maybe I'll run the wire all the way to the front and ground it someplace really nice like the engine block. I picked up a fairly inexpensive amplifier installation kit at Walmart and used the 6-gauge power wire that comes with it, and it's fused. Eventually I'm going to move that fuse, but for right now it's going to have to stay where it's at. Ran that cable, and it was at that time that I realized that I wasn't going to get all this cable through one grommet, so I had to drill another grommet in the hole. The good news is, behind the fenders, it won't show. Drilled another hole, installed another grommet, and ran that wire and the main power wire to the fuse block through that hole too, so I had a little more room for the other wires if I needed it. Got the steering column assembled and wired up together. This car came factory with a collapsible steering column, so obviously I'm going to leave it in there. It's a classic car. It's not going to be anywhere near as safe as a modern day car, but any place that I can leave it or improve it, I intend to. Well, like I said, down the road when I can get the factory pigtails and stuff like that, I'll go through and rewire this. But for right now, I just used quick disconnect connectors, standard generic cable things to get everything wired up. If it tests and works out, I may have time to go back and do it again, hopefully, maybe. Made another diagram / list of the color wires that were in the wiring harness and the coloring wires that went with the turn signal cam. Cross-referenced them all and spliced them accordingly. Went through and installed the turn signal cam, fastened everything down. Car's pretty much ready for the horn and turn signal switch and that good stuff, but for right now, steering column's just going to get installed. But first I've got to figure out the clutch problem. And on the other side of the steering column wiring harness, I went through and cut the GM style thing off of there, and then did the same thing. Just went through, spliced them all, put quick disconnectors on there, and for now, hopefully this will function to at least get this thing rolling. Parking lights and marker lights for the front of the car came in this week, ordered them from CJ Pony Parts. Spent a little time pillaging the previous wiring harness, which is of no use to me because all the plastic connectors are cracked and broken and busted, and some of the wires are frayed and thing. But the connectors for the parking lights and marker lights at the front of the car are actually in reasonably good shape, and the wires are good. So I took those apart. My plan is to use a mod that's been posted on the internet to make the parking lights on the side into turn indicators. I'm a big turn indicator fan. So I'm going to do some temporary wiring to see if I can make this work. spent a few minutes pulling apart the harnesses back as I wanted an extra little bit of length of wiring. And then I labeled the wires that were in the harness by color, and then used a diagram that I printed out and the Haynes Manual electrical system diagram to further label the wires with what they went to specifically. At that point in time, I knew which wires went where. I was able to splice the appropriate wires together to hopefully turn the previous amber marker lights into functioning turn signals and marker lights. So I don't know if this is going to work. We'll see. But either way, have a great week, and I'll see you next week.